The Rivan Codex, Ancient Texts of the Belgariad and the Malloreon, by David and Lee Eddings. For Malcolm, Jane, Joy, Jeff, and all the staff at HarperCollins, it's always a genuine pleasure to work with you. With all our thanks, David and Lee. Introduction. My decision to publish this volume was made in part because of a goodly number of flattering letters I've received over the past several years. Some of these letters have come from students at various levels, and to make matters worse, I've also received letters from teachers who inform me that they're actually encouraging this sort of thing. Aren't they aware that they're supposed to wait until I'm safely in the ground before they do this? The students, naturally, ask questions. The teachers hint around the edges of an invitation to stop by and address the class. I'm very flattered, as I mentioned, but I don't write or grade term papers anymore, and I don't travel. To put it idiomatically, I ain't going no place. I've been where I'm going. Then there are those other letters, the ones which rather bashfully confide an intention to try writing fantasy myself. I don't worry too much about those correspondents. They'll get over that notion rather quickly, once they discover what's involved. I'm sure that most of them will eventually decide to take up something simpler, brain surgery or rocket science, perhaps. I'd more or less decided to just file those letters and keep my mouth shut. A prolonged silence might be the best way to encourage a passing fancy to do just that, pass. Then I recalled a conversation I had with Lester Del Rey on one occasion. When I'd first submitted my proposal for the Belgariad, I'd expected the usual leisurely reaction time, but Lester responded with what I felt to be unseemly haste. He wanted to see this thing. Now I wasn't ready to let him see it. Now, I was in revision of what I thought would be Book 1, and since I was still doing honest work in those days, my time was somewhat curtailed. I wanted to keep him interested, however, so I sent him my preliminary studies instead, so that you'll have the necessary background material. Lester later told me that while he was reading those studies, he kept telling himself, "There's no way we can publish this stuff." But then he admitted, "But I kept reading." We were fairly far along in the Belgariad when we made this confession, and he went on to say, "Maybe when we've got the whole story finished, we might want to think about releasing those studies." Eventually, the two ideas clicked together. I had people out there asking questions, and I had the answers readily at hand, since nobody in his right mind takes on a multi-book project without some fairly extensive preparation. My preliminary studies were right there taking up space. I just finished a 5-book contract, and I had nothing else currently on the fire. All this thing needed was a brief introduction and some footnotes, and we were off to press. Just in passing, I should advise you that my definition of brief and yours might differ just a bit. It takes me 100 pages just to clear my throat. Had you noticed that? I thought you might have. Please bear in mind the fact that these studies are almost 20 years old, and there are going to be gaps. There are places where some great leaps occurred, frequently flowing out of the point of my pen during the actual writing, and I wasn't keeping a diary to report these bursts of inspired creativity. I'll candidly admit that probably no more than half of these strokes of genius actually worked. Some of them would have been disastrous. Fortunately, my collaborator was there to catch those blunders. Trial and error enter into any form of invention, I suppose. This book may help others to avoid some of the missteps we made along the way, and it may give the student of our genre some insights into the creative process. Something on the order of, connect wire A to wire B. Warning, do not connect wire A to wire C, because that will cause the whole thing to blow up in your face. Now that I've explained what I'm up to here, let's get the lecture out of the way. Did you really think I'd let you get away without one? After I graduated from the U.S. Army in 1956, one of my veterans' benefits was the now famous GI Bill. My government had decided to pay me to go to graduate school, I worked for a year to save up enough for some incidentals, food, clothing, and shelter, and then enrolled in the graduate school of the University of Washington in Seattle. A good day in Seattle is a day when it isn't raining up. My area of concentration was supposed to be modern American fiction, Hemingway, Faulkner, and Steinbeck. But I had those PhD exams lurking out in the future, so I knew that I'd better spend some time with Chaucer, Shakespeare, and Milton as well. Once I'd mastered Middle English, I fell in love with Chaucer, and somewhat by extension, with Sir Thomas Malory. Since what is called epic fantasy in the contemporary world descends in an almost direct line from medieval romance, my studies of Chaucer and Malory gave me a running head start in the field. Medieval romance had a long and honorable history, stretching from about the 11th century to the 16th, when Don Quixote finally put it to sleep. It was a genre that spoke of the Dark Ages in glowing terms, elevating a number of truly barbaric people to near sainthood. The group that is of most interest to the English-speaking world, of course, is King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. There may or may not have been a real King Arthur, but that's beside the point. We should never permit historical reality to get in the way of a good story, should we? Since the issues come up, though, let's take a look at someone who was historically verifiable and who had a great deal of impact on the fledgling genre in its earliest of days. The lady in question was the infamous Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor was related to 5, count 'em, different kings, or pseudo-kings, during the 12th century. Her father was the Duke of Aquitaine, now known as Gascony, and since he controlled more land than the King of France, he routinely signed official documents as the King of Aquitaine. In 1137, Louis of France arranged a marriage between his son, Prince Louis, and Princess Eleanor. Eleanor wasn't a good wife, since she had what's politely known as a roving eye. Evidently, it was more than her eye that roved. Her husband, who soon became Louis VII of France, was a pious man, and his wandering wife not only failed to produce an heir to his throne, but also became notorious as an adulteress. He finally managed to have their marriage annulled in 1152, and 2 months later Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet to be King Henry II of England. Eleanor, as it turned out, was not barren, and she bore Henry several sons. Aside from that, Henry and Eleanor didn't really get along together, so he took the easy way out and locked her up to keep her out of his hair. After he died, Eleanor stirred up trouble between her sons, Richard the Lion-Hearted and John the Incompetent, both of whom became kings of England. They also locked Mother away to keep her out of mischief. Thus, Eleanor spent a lot of her time locked up. Embroidery didn't thrill her too much, so she read books. Books were very expensive in the 12th century because they had to be copied by hand. But Eleanor didn't care. She had money, if not freedom, so she could afford to pay assorted indigents with literary pretensions to write the kind of books she liked. Given Eleanor's background, it's understandable that she liked books about kings, knights in shining armor, pretty young fellows who played the lute and sang of love with throbbing emotion, and fair damsels cruelly imprisoned in towers. Her literary tastes gave rise to troubadour poetry, the courtly love tradition, and whole libraries of interminable French romances that concentrated heavily on The Matter of Britain, King Arthur et al., and The Matter of France, Charlemagne and Company. Now we jump forward 300 years to the Wars of the Roses. There was a certain knight named Sir Thomas Malory, probably from Warwickshire, who sided with the Lancastrians. When the Yorkist faction gained the ascendancy, Sir Thomas was clapped into prison. He was not, strictly speaking, a political prisoner, however. He was in prison because he belonged there, since it appears that he was a career criminal more than a political partisan. There may have been some politics involved in the various charges leveled against him, of course, but the preponderance of evidence suggests that he was a sort of medieval Jesse James, leading a gang of outlaws on a rampage through southern England. He was imprisoned for sedition, murder, the attempted murder of the Duke of Buckingham, cattle rustling, horse theft, the looting of monasteries, jailbreaking, and not infrequently of rape. Sir Thomas seems to have been a very bad boy. He was still a nobleman, however, and a sometime member of Parliament, so he was able to persuade his jailers to let him visit a nearby library. Under guard, of course. Sir Thomas was quite proud of his facility in the French language, and while he whiled away the hours of his incarceration translating the endless French romances dealing with, what else, King Arthur, the end result was the work we now know as Le Mort d'Arthur. A technological breakthrough along about then ensured a wide distribution of Malory's work. William Caxton had a printing press, and he evidently grew tired of grinding out religious pamphlets, so, sensing a potential market, he took Malory's manuscript and edited it in preparation for a printing run. I think we underestimate Caxton's contribution to Le Mort d'Arthur. If we can believe most scholars, Malory's original manuscript was pretty much a hodgepodge of disconnected tales, and Caxton organized them into a coherent whole, giving us a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now we jump forward another 400 years. Queen Victoria ascended the British throne at the age of 17. Queen Victoria had opinions. Queen Victoria didn't approve of naughty stuff. Queen Victoria had a resident poet, Alfred Lord Tennyson, and he cleaned up Malory for his queen to produce a work he called Idylls of the King. Idylls of the King is a fairly typical Victorian bowdlerization that accepted the prevailing attitude of the time, that Le Mort d'Arthur was little more than bold bawdry and open manslaughter. It glossed over such picky little details as the fact that Guinevere was an adulteress, that King Arthur did have an incestuous affair with his half-sister, Morgan Le Fay, and other improprieties. Another 100 years slip by, and we come to Papa Tolkien, who was probably even prissier than Queen Victoria. Have you ever noticed that there aren't any girl hobbits? There are matronly lady hobbits and female hobbit puppies, but no girls. The Victorians maintained the public fiction that females don't exist below the neck. Contemporary fantasists all bow politely to Lord Tennyson and Papa Tolkien, then step around them to go back to the original texts for inspiration. And there are a lot of those texts. We have King Arthur and his gang in English. We've got Siegfried and Brunhild in German, Charlemagne and Roland in French, El Cid in Spanish, Sigurd the Volsung in Icelandic, and assorted mightiest knights on life in a half-dozen other cultures. Without shame, we pillage medieval romance for all we're worth. Operating by trial and error mostly, we've evolved a tacitly agreed-upon list of the elements that make for a good fantasy. The first decision the aspiring fantasist must make is theological. King Arthur and Charlemagne were Christians. Siegfried and Sigurd the Volsung were pagans. My personal view is that pagans write better stories. When a writer is having fun, it shows, and pagans have more fun than Christians. Let's scrape Horace's dulce et utile off the plate before we even start the banquet. We're writing for fun, not to provide moral instruction. I had much more fun with the Belgariad and Malloreon than you did, because I know where all the jokes are. All right, then. For item number 1, I chose paganism. Note that Papa Tolkien, a devout Anglo-Catholic, took the same route. Item number 2 on our interim list is the quest. If you don't have a quest, you don't have a story. The quest gives you an excuse to dash around and meet new people. Otherwise, you stay home and grow turnips or something. Item number 3 is the magic thingamajig, the Holy Grail, the Ring of Power, the Magic Sword, the Sacred Book, or, surprise, surprise, the Jewel. Everybody knows where I came down on that one. The magic thingamajig is usually, though not always, the object of the quest. Item number 4 is our hero, Sir Galahad, Sir Gawain, Sir Lancelot, Sir Percival. Galahad is saintly. Gawain is loyal. Lancelot is the heavyweight champion of the world. And Percival is dumb. At least right at first. I went with Percival, because he's more fun. A dumb hero is the perfect hero, because he hasn't the faintest idea what's going on. And in explaining things to him, the writer explains them to his reader. Don't get excited. I'm not putting Garion down. He's innocent more than stupid, in the same way Percival was. Actually, he's fairly clever, but he's a country boy, so he hasn't been exposed to very much of the world. His Aunt Pol wanted him to be that way, and Polgara has ways to get what she wants. Item number 5 is the resident wizard, Merlin, usually, or Gandalf, mighty, powerful, and mysterious. I scratched that one right away and went with Belgarath instead, and I think it was the right choice. I've got a seedy old tramp with bad habits, who just incidentally can rip the tops off mountains if he wants to. I chose to counter him with his daughter, Polgara, who doesn't really approve of him. That sorcerer, sorceress, and father-daughter pairing broke some new ground, I think. Item 6 is our heroine, usually a wispy blonde girl who spends most of her time mooning around in a tower. I chose not to go that route, obviously. Sinedra is a spoiled brat. There's no question about that. But she is a little tiger when the chips are down. She turned out even better than I expected. Item 7 is a villain with diabolical connections. I invented Torak, and he served our purpose rather well. I even managed to give him a fairly believable motivation. Milton helped on that one. Torak isn't exactly Lucifer, but he comes close. As usual, he has a number of evil underlings to do his dirty work for him. Stay with me, we're almost done. Item 8 is the obligatory group of companions, that supporting cast of assorted muscular types from various cultures who handle most of the killing and mayhem until the hero grows up to the point where he can do his own violence on the bad guys. Item 9 is the group of ladies who are attached to the bully boys in Item 8. Each of these ladies also needs to be well defined, with idiosyncrasies and passions of her own. And finally, we come to Item 10. Those are the kings, queens, emperors, courtiers, bureaucrats, et al., who are the governments of the kingdoms of the world. Okay, end of list. If you've got those 10 items, you're on your way toward a contemporary fantasy. You're also on your way to a cast of thousands. All right then, now for a test. Write an epic fantasy in no less than 3 and no more than 12 volumes. Then sell it to a publisher. You have 20 years. Don't send it to me. I don't have a printing press, and I do not read in the field. It's a way to avoid contamination. Stop! Do not uncover your typewriter, uncap your pen, or plug in your computer just yet. A certain amount of preparation might help. It's a good idea to learn how to drive an automobile before you hop into the family car and take off for Los Angeles. And it's probably an equally good idea to browse through a couple of medical texts before you saw off the top of Uncle Charlie's head in preparation for brain surgery. Let me stress one thing at the outset. This is the way we did it. This is not the only way to do it. Our way worked out fairly well, but others, done differently, have worked just as well. If you don't like our way, we won't be offended. Now, of necessity, we get into a bit of biography. This introduction is designed to provide enough biographical detail to answer students' questions and to provide a description of our preparations. I hope it satisfies you, because it's all you're going to get. My private life is just that, private, and it's going to stay that way. You don't really need to know what I had for breakfast. I was born in Washington, the state, not the city, in 1931. Go ahead, start counting. Depressing, huh? I graduated from high school in 1949, worked for a year, and then enrolled in a junior college, majoring in speech, drama, and English. I tore that junior college up. I won a statewide oratorical contest and played the male lead in most of the drama presentations. Then I applied for and received a scholarship at Reed College in Portland, Oregon. And Reed turned out to be quite a bit more difficult. The college required a thesis for graduation, so I wrote a novel. What else? Then I was drafted. The Army sent me to Germany instead of Korea, where people were still shooting at each other. I'd studied German, so I got along fairly well. And when I wasn't playing soldier with my jeep and my submachine gun, I made the obligatory pilgrimages to Paris, London, Vienna, Naples, Rome, Florence, and Berlin, before the wall. It was all very educational, and I even got paid for being in Europe. Then I came back to the States and was discharged. I had that GI Bill, so I went to the University of Washington for 4 years of graduate study. I've already told you about that, so I won't dwell on it. During my college years, I worked part-time in grocery stores, a perfect job for a student, since the hours can be adjusted to fit with the class schedule. Then I went to work for Boeing, building rocket ships. I was a buyer, not an engineer. I helped, in a small way, to put a man on the moon. I married a young lady whose history was even more interesting than mine. I was a little miffed when I discovered that her security clearance was higher than mine. I thought top secret was the top of the line, but I was wrong. She'd also been to places I hadn't even heard of, since she'd been in the Air Force, while I'd been a ground pounder. I soon discovered that she was a world-class cook, a highly skilled fisherwoman, and, after an argument about whether or not that was really a deer lying behind that log 100 yards away late one snowy afternoon, she demonstrated that she was a dead shot with a deer rifle by shooting poor old Bambi right between the eyes. I taught college for several years, and then one year the administrators all got a pay raise, and the teaching faculty didn't. I told them what they could do with their job, and my wife and I moved to Denver, where we, rode high hunt in our spare time while I worked in a grocery store, and my wife worked as a motel maid. We sold high hunt to Putnam, and I was now a published author. We moved to Spokane, and I turned to grocery stores again to keep us eating regularly. I was convinced that I was a serious novelist, and I labored long and hard over several unpublished and unpublishable novels that moped around the edges of mawkish contemporary tragedy. In the mid-1970s, I was grinding out Hunsaker's Ascent, a story about mountain climbing which was a piece of tripe so bad that it even bored me. No, you can't see it. I burned it. Then one morning, before I went off to my day job, I was so bored that I started doodling. My doodles produced a map of a place that never was, and is probably a geological impossibility. Then, feeling the call of duty, I put it away and went back to the tripe table. Some years later, I was in a bookstore going in the general direction of the serious fiction. I passed the science fiction rack and spotted one of the volumes of The Lord of the Rings. I muttered, "Is this old turkey still floating around?" Then I picked it up and noticed that it was in its 78th printing. That got my immediate attention, and I went back home and dug out the aforementioned doodle. It seemed to have some possibilities. Then, methodical as always, I ticked off the above-listed necessities for a good medieval romance. I'd taken those courses in Middle English authors in graduate school, so I had a fair grip on the genre. I realized that since I'd created this world, I was going to have to populate it, and that meant that I'd have to create the assorted ologies as well, before I could even begin to put together an outline. The Rivan Codex was the result. I reasoned that each culture had to have a different class structure, a different mythology, a different theology, different costumes, different forms of address, different national character, and even different coinage and slightly different weights and measures. I might never come right out and use them in the books, but they had to be there. The Belgariad preliminaries took me most of 1978 and part of 1979. I was still doing honest work in those days, so my time was limited. One of the major problems when you're dealing with wizards is the Superman syndrome. You've got this fellow who's faster than a speeding bullet and all that stuff. He can uproot mountains and stop the sun. Bullets bounce off him, and he can read your mind. Who's going to climb into that ring with this terror? I suppose I could have gone with incantations and spells, but to make that sort of thing believable, you've got to invent at least part of the incantation. And sooner or later, some nut is going to take you seriously. And, absolutely convinced that he can fly if he says the magic words, he'll jump off a building somewhere. Or, if he believes that the sacrifice of a virgin will make him Lord of the universe, and some Girl Scout knocks on his door. I think it was a sense of social responsibility that steered me away from the hocus-pocus routine. Anyway, this was about the time when the ESP fakers were announcing that they could bend keys, or crowbars, for all I know, with the power of their minds. Bingo! The will and the word was born. And it also eliminated the Superman problem. The notion that doing things with your mind exhausts you as much as doing them with your back was my easiest way out. You might be able to pick up a mountain with your mind, but you won't be able to walk after you do it. I can guarantee that. It worked out quite well, and it made some interesting contributions to the story. We added the prohibition against unmaking things later, and we had a workable form of magic with some nasty consequences attached if you broke the rules. Now we had a story. Next came the question of how to tell it. My selection of Sir Percival, Sir Dumb if you prefer, sort of ruled out high style. I can write in high style if necessary. See Mandaralin with his these, thous, and forasmuches. But Garion would have probably swallowed his tongue if he'd tried it. Moreover, magic, while not a commonplace, is present in our imaginary world. So I wanted to avoid all that, gee whiz, would you look at that, sort of reaction. I wanted language that was fairly colloquial, with a few cultural variations, to make the whole thing accessible to contemporary readers, but with just enough antique usages to give it a medieval flavor. Among the literary theories I'd encountered in graduate school was Jung's notion of archetypal myth. The application of this theory usually involves a scholar laboring mightily to find correspondences between current and not-so-current fiction, and drama to link them to Greek mythology. Did Hamlet really lust after his mother, the way Oedipus did? It occurred to me that archetypal myth might not be very useful in the evaluation of a story, but might it not work in its creation? I tried it, and it works. I planted more mythic fishhooks in the first couple of books of the Belgariad than you'll find in any sporting goods store. I've said, too many times probably, that if you read the first 100 pages of the Belgariad, I gotcha. You won't be able to put it down. The use of archetypal myth in the creation of fiction is the literary equivalent of peddling dope. The preliminaries to the Belgariad are actually out of sequence here. The personal history of Belgarath the Sorcerer was written after the rest of the studies while I was trying to get a better grip on the old boy. You might want to compare that very early character sketch with the opening chapters of the more recent Belgarath the Sorcerer. Did you notice the similarities? I thought I noticed you noticing. When I first tackled these studies, I began with the holy books, and the most important of these is the Book of Alorn. When you get right down to it, that one contains the germ of the whole story. After that, I added the Book of Torak. Fair is fair, after all, and equal time sounds sort of fair, I guess. The Testament of the Snake People was an exercise in showing off. A poem in the shape of a snake? Gee! The hymn to Chaldan was supposed to help explain the errands. A war god isn't all that unusual. The Marags are extinct, but that equal time regulation was still in place, so I took a swing at the grief-stricken god Mara. I had fun with the Proverbs of Nedra, a sort of theological justification for pure greed. Maybe I'll make a deal with the New York Stock Exchange and they can engrave those proverbs on the wall. The Sermon of Aldur was a false start, since it speaks glowingly of unmaking things, which Ul prohibited in the next section. That section, the Book of Ulgo, was rather obviously based on the Book of Job. Note that I'll even steal from the Bible. Gorim came off rather well, I thought. Incidentally, Ul was a typographical error the first time it appeared. I liked the way it looked on paper, so I kept it. Would you prefer to have me claim divine inspiration? I'm going to disillusion some enthusiasts here, I'm afraid. Notice that the Rivan Codex and the Belgariad Codex aren't included here. They don't appear because they don't exist. They're a literary device and nothing more. I once jokingly told Lester that I'd be willing to write the Rivan Codex if he'd agree to publish it on a scroll, but he declined. I used the Rin as a form of exposition. Those periodic breakthroughs when Belkira and Beltira, or whoever else is handy, finally crack the code are the things that set off a new course of action. I catch hints of a religious yearning when people start pleading for copies of the Rin. Sorry, gang, I'm not in the business of creating new religions. This is story, not revelation. I'm a storyteller, not a prophet of God. Okay? Once the holy books were out of the way, I was ready to tackle the histories, and that's where all the ologies started showing up, along with a chronology. When you've got a story that lasts for 7,000 years, you'd better have a chronology and pay close attention to it, or you're going to get lost somewhere in the 39th century. The histories of the Aloran kingdoms are fairly central to the story, but it was the history of the Tolnadron Empire that filled in all the cracks. You'll probably notice how tedious the Tolnadron history is. If you think reading it was tedious, try writing it. It was absolutely essential, however, since much of the background material grew out of it. Most of the similarities between the people of this world and our imaginary one should be fairly obvious. The Sendars correspond to rural Englishmen, the Arans to Norman French, the Tolnadrons to Romans, the Chereks to Vikings, the Algars to Cossacks, the Ulgos to Jews, and the Angaraks to Hunnish, Mongolian, Muslim Visigoths, out to convert the world by sword. I didn't really have correspondences in mind for the Drosnians, Rivans, Marags, or Yisins. They're story elements and don't need to derive from this world. By the time we got to the histories of the Angarak kingdoms, we were ready to dig into the story itself, so the Angaraks got fairly short shrift. I wanted to get on with it. There were footnotes in the original of these studies, but they were included, with identifying single spacing, in the body of the text. These are the mistaken perceptions of the scholars at the University of Tolhonath. The footnotes I'm adding now are in their proper location, at the foot of the page, naturally. These later notes usually point out inconsistencies. Some of this material just didn't work when we got it into the actual narrative. And I'm not one to mess up a good story just for the sake of sticking to an outdated game plan. The addition of the Battle of Vomimbra was a sort of afterthought. I knew that epic fantasy derived from medieval romance, so just to reinforce that point of origin, I wrote one. It has most of the elements of a good, rousing medieval romance, and all of its flaws. I'm still fairly sure that it would have made Eleanor of Aquitaine light up like a Christmas tree. I wanted to use it in its original form as the prologue for Queen of Sorcery, but Lester Del Rey said no. A 27-page prologue didn't thrill him. That's when I learned one of the rules. A prologue does not exceed 8 pages. Lester finally settled the argument by announcing that if I wrote an overly long prologue, he'd cut it down with a dull axe. Oh, there was another argument a bit earlier. Lester didn't like Aloria. He wanted to call it Alornia. I almost exploded, but my wife calmly took the telephone away from me and sweetly said, "Lester, dear, Alornia. Sounds sort of like a cookie to me. Alornia Dune? Lester thought about that for a moment. It does, sort of, doesn't it? Okay, Aloria it is then. Our side won that one big time. I'm not passing along these gossipy little tales for the fun of it, people. There's a point buried in most of them. The point to this one is the importance of the sound of the names in high fantasy. Would Lancelot impress you very much if his name were Charlie or Wilbur? The bride of my youth spends hours concocting names. It was, and still is, her specialty. She's also very good at deleting junk and coming up with great endings. I can manufacture names if I have to, but hers are better. Incidentally, that Gar at the center of Belgarath, Polgara, and Garian derives from Proto-Indo-European. Linguists have been amusing themselves for years backtracking their way to the original language spoken by the barbarians, who came wandering off the steppes of Central Asia 12,000 or so years ago. Gar meant spear back in those days. Isn't that interesting? When the preliminary studies were finished, my collaborator and I hammered together an outline, reviewed our character sketches, and we got started. When we had a first draft of what we thought was going to be Book 1 completed, I sent a proposal, complete with the overall outline, to Ballantine Books, and naturally, the post office department lost it. After 6 months, I sent a snippy note to Ballantine. At least you could have had the decency to say no. They replied, "Gee, we never got your proposal." I had almost dumped the whole idea of the series because of the gross negligence of my government. I sent the proposal off again. Lester liked it, and we signed a contract. Now we were getting paid for this, so we started to concentrate. Incidentally, my original proposal envisioned a trilogy, 3 books tentatively titled Garion, Sinedra, and Kaltorak. That notion tumbled down around my ears when Lester explained the realities of the American publishing business to me. B. Dalton and Walden Books had limits on genre fiction, and those 2 chains ruled the world. At that time, they wanted genre fiction to be paperbacks priced at under $3, and thus no more than 300 pages. "This is what we're going to do," Lester told me. Notice that we. He didn't really mean we, he meant me. We're going to break it up into 5 books instead of 3. My original game plan went out the window. I choked and went on. The chess piece titles, incidentally, were Lester's idea. I didn't like that one very much either. I wanted to call Book 5, In the Tomb of the One-Eyed God. I thought that had a nice ring to it, but Lester patiently explained that a title that long wouldn't leave any room for a cover illustration. I was losing a lot of arguments here. Lester favored the bulldozer approach to his writers, though, so he ran over me fairly often. I did win one, though, I think. Lester had told me that fantasy fiction is the prissiest of all art forms. I knew that he was wrong on that one. I've read the works from which contemporary fantasy has descended, and prissy is a wildly inappropriate description, derived, no doubt, from Tennyson and Tolkien. I set out to delicately suggest that girls did, in fact, exist below the neck. I'll admit that I lost a few rounds, but I think I managed to present a story that suggested that there are some differences between boys and girls, and that most people find that sort of interesting. All right, time out. For those of you who intend to follow my path, here's what you should do. Get an education first. You're not qualified to write epic fantasy until you've been exposed to medieval romance. As I said earlier, there are all kinds of medieval literature. Look at the Norse stuff. Try the German stories. If you don't want to read them, go see them on stage in Wagnerian operas. Look at Finland, Russia, Ireland, Iceland, Arabia, even China or India. The urge to write and read high fantasy seems to be fairly universal. Next comes the practice writing. I started on contemporary novels, High Hunt and The Losers. The publication date of The Losers is June 1992, but I wrote it back in the 1970s. It's not strictly speaking a novel, but rather is an allegory. The one-eyed Indian is God, and Jake Flood is the devil. Notice that I wrote it before we started the Belgariad. If you're serious about this, you have to write every day, even if it's only for an hour. Scratch the words weekend and holiday out of your vocabulary. If you've been very good, I might let you take a half day off at Christmas. Write 1 million or so words, then burn them. Now you're almost ready to start. This is what I was talking about earlier when I suggested that most aspiring fantasists will lose heart fairly early on. I was in my mid-teens when I discovered that I was a writer. Notice that I didn't say, wanted to be a writer. Want has almost nothing to do with it. It's either there or it isn't. If you happen to be one, you're stuck with it. You'll write whether you get paid for it or not. You won't be able to help yourself. When it's going well, it's like reaching up into heaven and pulling down fire. It's better than any dope you can buy. When it's not going well, it's much like giving birth to a baby elephant. You'll probably notice the time lapse. I was 40 before I wrote a publishable book. A 25-year-long apprenticeship doesn't appeal to very many people. The first thing a fantasist needs to do is to invent a world and draw a map. Do the map first. If you don't, you'll get lost, and picky readers with nothing better to do will gleefully point out your blunders. Then do your preliminary studies and character sketches in great detail. Give yourself at least a year for this. 2 would be better. Your quest, your hero, your form of magic, and your races will probably grow out of these studies at some point. If you're worried about how much this will interfere with a normal life, take up something else. If you decide to be a writer, your life involves sitting at your desk. This is what you do to the exclusion of all else, and there aren't any guarantees. You can work on this religiously for 50 years and never get into print, so don't quit your day job. It was about the time that we finished Book 3 of the Belgariad that we met Lester and Judy Lynn Del Rey in person. We all had dinner together, and I told Lester that I thought there was more story than we could cram into 5 books, so we might want to think about a second set. Lester expressed some interest. Judy Lynn wanted to write a contract on a napkin. How's that for acceptance? We finished up the Belgariad, and then went back into preliminaries mode. Our major problem with the Malloreon lay in the fact that we'd killed off the devil at the end of the Belgariad. No villain, no story. The bad guys do have their uses, I suppose. Xandrimas, in a rather obscure way, was a counter to Polgara. Pol, though central to the story as our mother figure, had been fairly subordinate in the Belgariad, and we wanted to move her to center stage. There are quite a few more significant female characters in the Malloreon than in the Belgariad. Xandrimas, my wife's brilliant name, is Torak's heir as Child of Dark. She yearns for elevation, but I don't think becoming a galaxy to replace the one that blew up was quite what she had in mind. The abduction of Prince Garen set off the obligatory quest, and abductions were commonplace in medieval romance, and in the real world of the Dark Ages as well. So we were still locked in our genre. We had most of our main characters, good guys and bad guys, already in place, and I knew that Malloreon was somewhere off to the east. So I went back to the map table and manufactured another continent, and the bottom half of the one we already had. We got a lot of mileage out of Calzaketh. That boy carried most of the Malloreon on his back. Then, by way of thanks, we fed him to Ceritus, and she had him for lunch. I'll confess that I got carried away with the Malloreon Gospels. I wanted the dolls to be mystical, so I pulled out all the stops and wrote something verging on biblical, but without the inconveniences of Judaism, Christianity, or Mohammedanism. What it all boiled down to was that the dolls could see the future, but so could Belgarath, if he paid attention to the Rivan Codex The whole story reeks of prophecy, but nobody can be really sure what it means. My now publicly exposed co-conspiratress and I have recently finished the second prequel to this story. And now, if you want to push it, we've got a classic 12-book epic. If 12 books were good enough for Homer, Virgil, and Milton, 12 is surely good enough for us. We are not going to tack on our version of the Odyssey to our already completed Iliad. The story's complete as it stands. There aren't going to be any more Garian stories. Period. End of discussion. All right, that should be enough for students, and it's probably enough to send those who'd like to try for themselves screaming off into the woods in stark terror. I doubt that it'll satisfy those who are interested in an in-depth biography of their favorite author, but you can't win them all, I guess. Are you up for some honesty here? Genre fiction is writing that's done for money. Great art doesn't do all that well in a commercial society. Nothing that Franz Kafka wrote ever appeared in print while he was alive. Miss Lonely Hearts sank without a ripple. Great literary art is difficult to read because you have to think when you read it, and most people would rather not. Epic fantasy can be set in this world. You don't have to create a new universe just to write one. My original doodle, however, put us off-world immediately. It's probably that off-world business in Tolkien that causes us to be lumped together with science fiction, and we have no business on the same rack with science fiction. Science fiction writers are technology freaks who blithely ignore that footnote in Einstein's theory of relativity, which clearly states that when an object approaches the speed of light, its mass becomes infinite. So much for warp drive. If old Buck Rogers hits the gas pedal a little too hard, he'll suddenly become the universe. Fantasists are magic and shining armor freaks who posit equally absurd notions with incantations, the will and the word, or other mumbo-jumbo. They want to build a better screwdriver, and we want to come up with a better incantation. They want to go into the future, and we want to go into the past. We write better stories than they do, though. They get all bogged down in telling you how the watch works. We just tell you what time it is and go on with the story. Science fiction and fantasy shouldn't even speak to each other, but try explaining that to a bookstore manager. Try explaining it to a publisher. Forget it. One last gloomy note. If something doesn't work, dump it, even if it means that you have to rip up several hundred pages and a half-year's work. More stories are ruined by the writer's stubborn attachment to his own overwrought prose than by almost anything else. Let your stuff cool off for a month and then read it critically. Forget that you wrote it and read it as though you didn't really like the guy who put it down in the first place. Then take a meat axe to it. Let it cool down some more and then read it again. If it still doesn't work, get rid of it. Revision is the soul of good writing. It's the story that counts, not your fondness for your own gushy prose. Accept your losses and move on. All right, I'll let you go for right now. We'll talk some more later. But why don't we let Belgarath take over for a while? Preface: The Personal History of Belgarath the Sorcerer. Footnote: The first-person narrative was written to give us a grip on Belgarath's character, and we wrote it almost 20 years ago. I always felt there was a story there. As it turned out, there were two, Belgarath the Sorcerer and Polgara the Sorceress. After we'd finished the Belgariad and the Malloreon, we knew how the story ended, so we could then go back and write the beginning. Most of Part 1 of Belgarath the Sorcerer is an expansion of this ancient manuscript, which also dictated the first-person narrative approach. End of footnote. In the light of all that has happened, this is most certainly a mistake. It would be far better to leave things as they are, with event and cause alike half buried in the dust of forgotten years. If it were up to me, I would so leave them. I have, however, been so importuned by an undutiful daughter, so implored by a great, and many times over, grandson, and so cajoled by that tiny and wilful creature who is his wife, a burden he will have to endure for all his days, that I must, if only to have some peace, set down the origins of the titanic events which have so rocked the world. Few will understand this, and fewer still will acknowledge its truth. I am accustomed to that. But since I alone know the beginning, the middle, and the end of these events, it is upon me to commit to perishable parchment, and to ink that begins to fade before it even dries, some ephemeral account of what happened and why. Thus, let me begin this story as all stories are begun, at the beginning. I was born in a village so small that it had no name. Footnote: the name of the village was added in Belgarath the Sorcerer to justify his name linguistically. Garath could mean of the village of Gara, in the archaic form of several languages. End of footnote. It lay, if I remember it correctly, on a pleasant green bank beside a small river that sparkled in the summer sun, as if its surface were covered with jewels. And I would trade all the jewels I have ever owned or seen to sit beside that river again. Our village was not rich, but in those days none were. The world was at peace, and our gods walked among us and smiled upon us. We had enough to eat and huts to shelter us from the weather. I do not recall who our god was, nor his attributes, nor his totem. It was, after all, a very, very long time ago. Like the other children, I played in the warm, dusty streets and ran through the long grass in the meadows, and paddled in that sparkling river which was drowned by the eastern sea so many years ago that they are beyond counting. My mother died when I was quite young. I remember that I cried about it for a very long time, though I must honestly admit that I could no longer even remember her face. I remember the gentleness of her hands, and the warm smell of fresh-baked bread that came from her garments, but I cannot remember her face. But then, there have been so many faces. The people of my village cared for me, and saw to it that I was fed, and clothed, and sheltered in one house or another. But I grew up wild. I never knew my father, and my mother was dead, and I was not content with the simple, drowsy life of a small, unnamed village beside a sparkling river, in a time when the world was very young. I began to wander out into the hills above my village, at first with only a stick and a sling, but later with more manly weapons, though I was still but a child. And then came a day in early spring when the air was cool, and the clouds raced overhead in a fresh young wind, and I had climbed to the top of the highest hill to the west of our river. And I looked down at the tiny patch of dun-colored huts beside a small river that did not sparkle beneath the scuttling clouds of spring. And then I turned and looked to the west at a vast grassland, and white-topped mountains beyond, and clouds roiling titanic in the gray sky. And I looked one last time at the village where I was born, and where, had I not climbed that hill on just such a morning, I might well have died. And I turned my face to the west, and I went from that place forever. The summer was easy. The plain yielded food in plenty to a young adventurer with the legs to chase it and the appetite to eat it, no matter how tough or poorly cooked. And in the fall I came upon a vast encampment of people, whitened as if by the touch of frost. They took me in and wept over me, and many came to touch me and to look at me, and they wept also. But one thing I found most strange. In the entire encampment there were no children, and to my young eyes the people seemed most terribly old. They spoke a language I did not understand, but they fed me and seemed to argue endlessly among themselves over who might have the privilege of keeping me in his tent or pavilion. I passed the winter among these strange people, and, as is so frequently the case with the young, I learned nothing in that season. I cannot remember even one word of the language they spoke. Footnote. These old people are those Ulgos who chose not to follow Gorum to Prolgu. As the branch that is cut off, they are withered and dying, because their women are barren. When the snow melted, and the frost seeped out of the ground, and the wind of spring began to blow again, I knew it was time to leave. I took no joy in the pampering of a multitude of grandparents, and had no desire to become the pet of a host of crotchety old people who could not even speak a civilized language. And so, early one spring morning, before the darkness had even slid off the sky, I sneaked from the camp and went south into a low range of hills, where their creaky old limbs could not follow me. I moved very fast, for I was young and well-fed and quite strong, but it was not fast enough. As the sun rose, I could hear the wails of unspeakable grief coming from the encampment behind me. I remember that sound very well. I loitered that summer in the hills and in the upper reaches of the vale to the south beyond them. It was in my mind that I might, if pursued by necessity, winter again in the camp of the old people. But, as it happened, an early storm caught me unprepared to the south of the hills, and the snow piled so deep that I could not make my way back across to my refuge. And my food was gone, and my shoes, mere bags of untanned hide, wore out, and I lost my knife, and it grew cold. In the end, I huddled behind a pile of rock that seemed to reach up into the very heart of the snowstorm that swirled around me, and tried to prepare myself for death. I thought of my village and of the grassy fields around it, and of our small sparkling river, and of my mother, and, because I was still really very young, I cried. "Why weepest thou, boy?" The voice was very gentle. The snow was so thick that I could not see who spoke, but the tone made me angry. "Because I'm cold, and I'm hungry," I said, "and because I'm dying and I don't want to." "Why art thou dying? Art thou injured?" "I'm lost," I said, "and it's snowing, and I have no place to go." "Is this reason enough to die amongst thy kind?" "Isn't it enough?" I said, still angry. "And how long dost thou expect this dying of thine will persist?" The voice seemed mildly curious. "I don't know," I said. "I've never done it before." The wind howled, and the snow swirled more thickly around me. "Boy," the voice finally said, "come here to me." "Where are you?" I said. "I can't see you." "Walk around the tower to thy left. Knowest thou thy left hand from thy right?" I stumbled to my half-frozen feet, angrier than I ever remember having been. "Well, boy?" I moved around what I had thought was a pile of rock, my hands on the stones. "Thou shalt come to a smooth gray rock," the voice said, "somewhat taller than thy head, and broad as thine arms may reach." "All right," I said, my lips thick with the cold. "Now what?" "Tell it to open." "What?" "Speak unto the rock," the voice said patiently, ignoring the fact that I was congealing in the gale. "Command it to open." "Command? Me?" "Thou art a man. It is but a rock." "What do I say?" "Tell it to open." "Open," I commanded, half-heartedly. "Surely thou canst do better than that." "Open!" I thundered, and the rock slid aside. "Come in, boy," the voice said. "Stand not in the weather like some befuddled calf." The inside of the tower, for such indeed it was dimly lighted by stones that glowed with a pale, cold fire. I thought that was a fine thing, though I would have preferred it, had they been warmer. Stone steps worn with countless centuries of footfalls ascended in a spiral into the gloom above my head. Other than that, the chamber was empty. "Close the door, boy," the voice said, not unkindly. "How?" I said. "How didst thou open it?" I turned to the gaping rock, and quite proud of myself, I commanded, "Close!" And, at my voice, the rock slid shut with a grinding sound that chilled my blood even more than the fierce storm outside. "Come up, boy," the voice commanded. And so I mounted the stairs, only a little bit afraid. The tower was very high, and the climbing took me a long time. At the top was a chamber filled with wonders. I looked at things such as I had never seen even before I looked at him who had commanded me and saved my life. I was very young, and I was not at the time above thoughts of theft. Larceny, even before gratitude, seethed in my grubby little soul. Near a fire which burned, as I observed, without fuel, sat a man, I thought, who seemed most incredibly ancient. His beard was long and full and white as the snow, which had so nearly killed me. But his eyes were eternally young. "Well, boy," he said, "hast thou decided not to die?" "Not if it isn't necessary," I said bravely, still cataloguing the wonders of the chamber. "Dost thou require anything?" he asked. "I am unfamiliar with thy kind." "A little food," I told him. "I have not eaten in 3 days. And a warm place to sleep. I shall not be much trouble, master, and I can make myself useful in payment." I had learned a long time ago how to make myself agreeable to those who were in a position to do me favors. "Master?" he said, and laughed, a sound so cheerful that it made me almost want to dance. "I am not thy master, boy." He laughed again, and my heart sang with the splendor of his mirth. "Let us see to this thing of food. What dost thou require?" "A little bread, perhaps," I said, "not too stale." "Bread?" he said. "Only bread? Surely, boy, thy stomach is fit for more than bread. If thou wouldst make thyself useful, as thou hast promised, we must nourish thee properly. Consider, boy, think of all the things thou hast eaten in thy life. What in all this world would most surely satisfy that vast hunger of thine?" I could not even say it. Before my eyes swam the visions of plump, smoking roasts, of fat geese swimming in their own gravy, of heaps of fresh-baked bread and rich golden butter, of pastries in thick cream, of cheese and dark brown ale, of fruits and nuts and salt to savor it all. And he who sat by the glowing fire that burned, it seemed, air alone, laughed again, and again my heart sang. "Turn, boy," he said, "and eat thy fill." And I turned, and there on a table which I had not even seen before lay everything which I had imagined. A hungry young boy does not ask where food comes from. He eats. And so I ate. I ate until my stomach groaned, and through the sound of my eating I could hear the laughter of the aged one beside his fire. And my heart leapt within me at each laugh. And when I had finished and drowsed over my plate, he spoke again. "Wilt thou sleep now, boy?" "A corner, master," I said, "a little out-of-the-way place by the fire, if it be not too much trouble." He pointed. "Sleep there, boy," he said, and at once I saw a bed which I had seen no more than the table. A great bed with huge pillows and comforters of softest down. And I smiled my thanks and crept into the bed, and, because I was young and very tired, I fell asleep almost at once. But in my sleep I knew that he who had brought me in from the storm and fed me and cared for me was watching through the long snowy night, and I felt even more secure in his care. And that began my servitude. My master never commanded in the way other masters commanded their servants, but rather suggested or asked. Amazingly, almost in spite of myself, I found myself leaping to do his bidding. The tasks, simple at first, grew harder and harder. I began to wish I had never come to this place. Sometimes my master would stop what he was doing to watch my labors, a bemused expression on his face. Then he would sigh and return to the things which he did and which I did not understand. The seasons turned, marching in their stately, ordered progression, as I labored endlessly at impossible tasks. Then, perhaps 3, or maybe it was 5, years after I'd come to the tower and begun my servitude, I was struggling one day to move a huge rock which my master felt was in his way. It would not move, though I heaved and pushed and strained until I thought my limbs would crack. Finally, in a fury, I concentrated all my strength and all my will upon the boulder and grunted one single word. "Move," I said. And it moved. Not grudgingly, with its huge, inert weight sullenly resisting my strength, but quite easily, as if the touch of one finger would be sufficient to send it bounding across the plain. "Well, boy?" my master said, startling me by his nearness. I had wondered how long it might be before this day arrived. "Master," I said, confused, "what happened? How did the great rock move so easily?" "It moved at thy command, boy. Thou art a man, and it is only a rock." "May other things be done so, master?" "All things may be done so, boy. Put but thy will to that which thou wouldst have come to pass, and speak the word. It shall come to pass even as thou wouldst have it. I have marveled, boy, at thine insistence upon doing all things with thy back, instead of thy will. I had begun to fear for thee, thinking that perhaps thou mightest be defective." I walked over to the rock and laid my hands on it again. "Move," I commanded, bringing my will to bear on it. And the rock moved as easily as before. "Does it make thee more comfortable touching the rock when thou wouldst move it, boy?" my master asked, a note of curiosity in his voice. The question stunned me. I looked at the rock. "Move," I said tentatively. The rock did not move. "Thou must command, boy, not entreat." "Move!" I roared, and the rock heaved and rolled off with nothing but my will, and the word to make it do so. "Much better, boy," my master said. "Perhaps there is hope for thee yet. What is thy name, boy?" "Garath," I told him, and suddenly realized that he had never asked me before. "An unseemly name, boy. I shall call thee Belgarath." "As it pleases thee, master," I said. I had never "thee'd" him before, and I held my breath for fear that he might be displeased. But he showed no sign that he had noticed. Then, made bold by my success, I went further. "And how may I call thee, master?" I said. "I am called Aldur," he said, smiling. I had heard the name before, and I immediately fell upon my face before him. "Art thou ill, Belgarath?" he asked. "O great and powerful God," I said, trembling, "forgive mine ignorance. I should have known thee at once." "Don't do that," he said irritably. "I require no obeisance. Rise to thy feet, Belgarath. Stand up, boy. Thine action is unseemly." I scrambled up fearfully and clenched myself for the sudden shock of lightning. Gods, as all knew, could destroy at their whim those who displeased them. "And what dost thou propose to do with thy life now, Belgarath?" he asked. "I would stay and serve thee, master," I said, as humbly as I could. "I require no service," he said. "What canst thou do for me?" "May I worship thee, master?" I pleaded. I had never met a god before, and was uncertain about the proprieties. "I do not require thy worship either," he said. "May I not stay, master?" I pleaded. "I would be thy disciple and learn from thee." "The desire to learn does thee credit, but it will not be easy," he warned. "I am quick to learn, master," I boasted. "I shall make thee proud of me." And then he laughed, and my heart soared. "Very well, then, Belgarath. I shall make thee my pupil." "And thy disciple also, master?" "That we will see in time, Belgarath." And then, because I was very young and very proud of myself and my newfound powers, I turned to a dried and brittle bush. It was midwinter at the time, and I spoke to it fervently. "Bloom," I said, and the bush quite suddenly produced a single flower. I plucked it and offered it to him. "For thee, master," I said, "because I love thee." And he took the flower and smiled and held it between his hands. "I thank thee, my son," he said. It was the first time he had ever called me that. "And this flower shall be thy first lesson. I would have thee examine it most carefully, and tell me all that thou canst perceive of it." And that task took me 20 years, as I recall. Each time I came to him with the flower that never wilted or faded. How I grew to hate that flower, and told him what else I had learned. He said, "Is that all, my son?" And crushed, I went back to my studies. And there were many other things as well that took at least as long. I examined trees and birds, fish and beasts, insects and vermin. I devoted 45 years to the study of grass alone. In time, it occurred to me that I was not aging as other men aged. "Master," I said one night in our chamber high in the tower, as we both labored with our studies, "why is it that I do not grow old?" "Wouldst thou grow old, my son?" he asked. "I have never seen much advantage in it myself." "I really don't miss it all that much, master," I admitted. "But isn't it customary?" "Perhaps," he said, "but not mandatory. Thou hast much yet to learn, and 1 or 10 or even 100 lifetimes are not enough. How old art thou, my son?" "I think I am somewhat beyond 300 years, master." "A suitable age, my son, and thou hast persevered in thy studies. Should I forget myself and call thee boy again, pray correct me. It is not seemly that the disciple of a god should be called boy." "I shall remember that, master," I said, almost overcome with joy that he had finally called me his disciple. "I was certain that thou wouldst," he said. "And what is the object of thy present study, my son?" "I would seek to learn why the stars fall, master." "A proper study, my son," he said, smiling. "And thou, master," I asked, "what is thy study, if I be not overbold to ask?" "I am concerned with this jewel," he said, pointing at a moderate-sized gray stone on the table before him. "It may be of some curiosity in the fullness of time." Footnote: It was not until the Malloreon that we revealed the orb's off-world origin. At first it was simply a rock Aldur had picked up in a riverbed and modified with the touch of his hand. End of footnote. "I am certain it shall, master," I assured him. "If be worthy of thine attention, it shall surely be a curiosity at least." And then I turned back to my study of the inconstant stars. In time, others came to us, some by accident, as I had come, and some by intent, seeking out my master that they might learn from him. Such a one was Zedder. I came upon him one golden day in autumn near our tower. He had built a rude altar and was burning the carcass of a goat upon it. The greasy smoke from his offering was fouling the air, and he was prostrated before the altar, chanting some outlandish prayer. "What are you doing?" I demanded, quite angry since his noise and the stink of his sacrifice distracted my mind from a problem I had been considering for 15 years. "Oh, puissant and all-knowing God," he said, groveling in the dirt, "I have come 1,000 leagues to behold thy glory and to worship thee." "Puissant?" I said. "Get up, man, and stop this caterwauling. I'm not a god, but a man, just as you are." "Art thou not the great god, Aldor?" he asked. "I am Belgarath," I said, "his disciple. What is this foolishness?" I pointed at his altar and his smoking offering. "It is to please the god," he said, rising and dusting off his clothes. "Dost thou think he will find it acceptable?" I laughed, for I did not like this stranger much. "I cannot think of a single thing you might have done which would offend him more," I said. The stranger looked stricken. He turned quickly and reached out as if he would seize the burning animal with his bare hands to hide it. "Don't be an idiot," I snapped. "You'll burn yourself." "It must be hidden," he said desperately. "I would die rather than offend mighty Aldor." "Stand out of the way," I told him. "What?" "Get clear," I said, irritably waving him off. Then I looked at his grotesque little altar, wheeled it away, and said, "Go away," and it vanished, leaving only a few tatters of confused smoke hanging in the air. He collapsed on his face again. "You're going to wear out your clothes if you keep doing that," I told him, "and my master will not be amused by it." I pray thee," he said, rising and dusting himself off again, "mighty disciple of the Most High Aldor, instruct me, so that I offend not the god." "Be truthful," I told him, "and do not seek to impress him with false show." "And how may I become his disciple as thou art?" "First you become his pupil," I said, "and that is not easy." "What must I do to become his pupil?" the stranger asked. "You must become his servant," I said, a bit smugly, I must admit. "And then his pupil?" "In time," I said, smiling, "if he so wills." "And when may I meet the god?" And so I took him to the tower. "Will the god Aldor not wish to know my name?" the stranger asked. "Not particularly," I said. "If you prove worthy, he will give you a name of his own choosing." Then I turned to the gray stone in the wall and commanded it to open, and then we went inside. My master looked the stranger over, and then turned to me. "Why hast thou brought this man to me, my son?" he asked. "He besought me, master," I said. "I felt it was not my place to say him yea or nay. Thy will must decide such things. If it be that he please thee not, I shall take him outside and bid him be no more, and so put an end to him and his interruption." "That is unkindly said, my son," Aldor said sternly. "The will and the word may not be used so." "Forgive me, master," I said humbly. "Thou shalt instruct him, Belgarath," my master said. "If it should be that thou findest him apt, inform me." "I will, master," I promised. "What is thy study currently?" "I examined the reason for mountains, master," I said. "Lay aside thy mountains, Belgarath, and study man instead. It may be that thou shalt find the study useful." "As my master commands," I said regretfully. I had almost found the secret of mountains, and I was not much enthused about allowing it to escape me. But that was the end of my leisure. I instructed the stranger as my master had bade me. I set him impossible tasks, and waited. To my mortification, within 6 months, he learned the secret of the will and the word. My master named him Belzadar, and accepted him as a pupil. And then came the others. Kira and Tira were twin shepherd boys who had become lost and wandered to us one day, and stayed. Makor came from so far away that I could not conceive how he had even heard of my master, and Din from so near that I wondered that his whole tribe did not come with him. Sambar simply appeared one day and sat down upon the earth in front of the tower and waited until we accepted him. And to me it fell to instruct each of them until he found the secret of the will and the word, which is not a secret after all, but lies within every man. And in time each of them became my master's pupil, and he named them even as he had named me. Zadar became Belzadar. Kira and Tira became Beltira and Belkira. Makor and Din and Sambar became Belmakor and Beldin and Belsambar. To each of our names our master joined the symbol of the will and the word, and we became his disciples. Footnote. A note here for the linguistically obsessed. Bel may or may not be the symbol of the will and the word. It is more likely that it means beloved. Bel is the masculine form, and Paul is the feminine. Polgara's name derives directly from her father's name, since it's a patronymic, like Ivan Ivanovich, Ivan, son of Ivan, or Natasha Ivanova, Natasha, daughter of Ivan, in Russian. Note that this principle does not apply to the name of Paul's sister, Beldarin, which perhaps indicates that Belgarath loved Beldarin more than he loved Paul. End of footnote. And we built other towers, so that our labors and our studies should not interfere with our master's work, or each other's. At first, I was jealous that my master spent time with these others, but, since time was meaningless to us anyway, and I knew that my master's love was infinite, so that his love for the others in no way diminished his love for me, I soon outgrew that particular childishness. And also, I grew to love the others as the bonds of our brotherhood grew. I could sense their minds as they worked, and I shared their joy at each new discovery they made. Because I was the first disciple, they often came to me as to an older brother with those things they were embarrassed to lay before our master, and I guided them as best I could. Thus passed a period of perhaps 1,000 years, and we were content. The world beyond our veil changed, and the people also, and no more pupils came to us. It was a question I always intended to pursue, but never found the time to examine. Perhaps the other gods grew jealous and forbade their people to seek us out, or perhaps it was that in their long passage through the endless generations, men somehow lost that tiny spark that is the source of the power of will and word, and is the lodestone that draws their spirits inevitably to the spirit of Aldur. So it was that we were 7 only, and we were unlike any other men on earth. And through all this time of study and learning, our master, Aldur, labored in infinite patience with that gray stone he had shown me on that night he accepted me as his disciple. Once I marveled to him that he should devote so much time to it, and he laughed. "Truly, my son," he said, "I labored once at least so long to create a flower, which is now so common that none take note of it. It blooms beside every dusty path, and men pass it by without even looking at it. But I know it is there, and I joy in its perfection. As I look back, I think I would give my life, which is stretched over so many years, if my master had never conceived the idea of that gray stone, which has brought so much woe into this world. The stone, which he called a jewel, was gray, as I have said, and quite round, and perhaps the size of a man's heart. My master found it, I believe, in the bed of a stream. To me it appeared to be a very ordinary stone, but things are concealed from me that Aldur, in his wisdom, perceived quite easily. It may be that there was something in the stone which he alone could see, or it may be that this ordinary gray stone became what it became because of his efforts, and his will, and his spirit with which he infused it. Whatever it may have been, I wished with all my heart that he had never seen it, never stooped and touched it, never picked it up. At any rate, one day, a very long time ago, it was finished, and our master called us together so that he might show it to us. "Behold this orb," he told us. "In it lies the fate of the world." And the gray stone, so ordinary a thing, but which had been polished by the touch of our master's hand for 1,000 years and more, began to glow as if a tiny blue fire flickered deep within it. And Belzadar, always quick, asked, "How, great master, can so small a thing be so important?" And our master smiled, and the orb grew brighter. Flickering dimly within it, I seemed to see images. "The past lies herein," our master said, "and the present and the future also. This is but a small part of the virtue of this thing which I have made. With it may man, or the earth itself, be healed or destroyed. Whatsoever one would do, even if it be beyond the power of the will and the word, with this may it come to pass." "Truly a wondrous thing, master," Belzadar said, and it seemed to me that his eyes glittered as he spoke, and his fingers seemed to itch. "But, master," I said, "thou hast said that the fate of the world lies within this orb of thine. How may that be?" "It hath revealed the future unto me, my son," my master said sadly. "The stone shall be the cause of much contention, and great suffering, and great destruction. Its power reaches from where it now sits to blow out the lives of men yet unborn, as easily as thou wouldst snuff a candle." "It is an evil thing then, master," I said, and Belsambar and Belmacor agreed. "Destroy it, master," Belsambar pleaded, "before it can bring this evil to the world." "That may not be," our master said. "Blessed is the wisdom of Aldur," Belzadar said. "With us to aid him, our master may wield this wondrous jewel for good and not ill. Monstrous would it be to destroy so precious a thing." Footnote. Notice that Belzadar's obsession with the orb is introduced here. End of footnote. "Destroy it, master," Belkira and Beltira said, as in one voice, their minds as always linked into the same thought. "We beseech thee, unmake this evil thing which thou hast made." "That may not be," our master said again. "The unmaking of things is forbidden. Even I may not unmake that which I have made." "But who shall forbid anything to the god Aldur?" Belmacor asked. "It is beyond thy understanding, my son," our master said. "To thee and to other men it may seem that my brothers and I are limitless, but it is not so. And I tell thee, my sons, I would not unmake the jewel even if it were permitted. Look about thee at the world in its childhood, and at man in his infancy. All living things must grow, and they will die. Through this orb shall the world be changed, and shall man achieve that state for which he was made. This jewel which I have made is not of itself evil. Evil is a thing which lies only in the minds and hearts of men, and of gods also." And then my master fell silent, And he sighed, and we went from him and left him in his sadness. In the years which followed, we saw little of our master. Alone in his tower, he communed with the spirit of the jewel which he had made. We were saddened by his absence, and our work had little joy in it. And then one day a stranger came into the vale. He was beautiful as no being I have ever seen was, or could be, and he walked as if his foot spurned the earth. As was customary, we went to greet him. "I would speak with my brother, thy master," he told us, and we knew we were in the presence of a god. As the eldest, I stepped forward. "I shall tell my master you have come," I said. I was not all that familiar with gods, since Aldur was the only one I had ever met, but something about this over-pretty stranger did not sit quite well with me. "That is not needful, Belgarath," he told me in a tone that sat even less well than his manner. "My brother knows I am here. Convey me to his tower." I turned and led the way without trusting myself to answer. At the foot of the tower, the stranger looked me full in the face. "A bit of advice for thee, Belgarath, by way of thanks for thy service to me. Seek not to rise above thyself. It is not thy place to approve or disapprove of me. For thy sake, when next we meet, I hope thou wilt remember this, and behave in a manner more seemly." His eyes seemed to bore directly into me, and his voice chilled me. But because I was still who I was, and even the 2,000 years I had lived in the Vale had not entirely put the wild, rebellious boy in me to sleep, I answered him somewhat tartly. "Thank you for the advice," I said. "Will you require anything else?" He was a god, after all, and didn't need me to tell him how to open the tower door. I waited, watching closely for some hint of confusion. "Thou art pert, Belgarath," he told me. "Perhaps one day I shall give myself leisure to instruct thee in proper behavior." "I'm always eager to learn," I told him. He turned and gestured negligently. The great stone in the wall of the tower opened, and he went inside. We never knew exactly what passed between our master and the strange, beautiful god who met with him. They spoke together for long hours, and then a summer storm broke above our heads, and we were forced to take shelter. We missed, therefore, the departure of the strange god. When the storm had cleared, our master called us to him, and we went up into his tower. He sat at the table where he had labored so long over the orb. There was a great sadness in his face, and my heart wept to see it. There was also a reddened mark upon his cheek, which I did not understand. But Belzadar, ever quick, saw at once what I did not see. "Master," he said, and his voice had the sound of panic in it, "where is the jewel? Where is the orb of power which thou hast made?" "Torak, my brother, hath taken it away with him," my master said, and his voice had almost the sound of weeping in it. "Quickly," Belzadar said, "we must pursue him and reclaim it before he escapes us. We are many, and he is but one." "He is a god, my son," Aldur said. "Thy numbers would mean nothing to him." "But master," Belzadar said most desperately, "we must reclaim the orb. It must be returned to us." "How did he obtain it from thee, master?" the gentle Beltira asked. "Torak conceived a desire for the thing," Aldur said, "and he besought me that I should give it to him. When I would not, he smote me and took the orb and ran." A rage seized me at that. Though the jewel was wondrous, it was still only a stone. The fact that someone had struck my master brought flames into my brain. I cast off my robe, bent my will into the air before me, and forged a sword with a single word. I seized the sword and leapt to the window. "No!" my master said, and the word stopped me as though a wall had been placed before me. Open, I commanded, slashing at the wall with the sword I had just made. No, my master said, and it would not let me through. He has struck thee, master, I raged. For that I will slay him, though he be 10 times a god. No, my master said again. Torak would crush thee as easily as thou would crush a fly which annoyed thee. Footnote. This is grammatically incorrect. When using archaic language, it is important to pay attention to the verb forms, which are not the same in second-person familiar as they are in second-person formal. The proper form here would be wouldst. End of footnote. I love thee much, my eldest son, and I would not lose thee so. There must be war, master, Belmacor said. The blow and the theft must not go unpunished. We will forge weapons. Belgarath shall lead us, and we shall make war upon this thief who calls himself a god. My son, our master said to him, there will be war enough to glut thee of it before thy life ends. The orb is as nothing. Gladly would I have given it unto my brother, Torak, were it not that the orb itself had told me that one day it would destroy him. I would have spared him had I been able, but his lust for the thing was too great, and he would not listen. He sighed and then straightened. There will be war, he said. My brother, Torak, hath the orb in his possession. It is of great power, and in his hands can do great mischief. We must reclaim it or alter it before Torak learns its full power. Alter? Belzadar said, aghast. Surely, master, surely thou wouldst not destroy this precious thing. No, Aldur said. It may not be destroyed, but will abide even unto the end of days. But if Torak can be pressed into haste, he will attempt to use it in a way that it will not be used. Such is its power. Belzadar stared at him. The world is inconstant, my son, our master explained. But good and evil are immutable and unchanging. The orb is an object of good, and is not merely a bauble or a toy. It hath understanding, not such as thine, but understanding nonetheless, and it hath a will. Beware of it, for the will of the orb is the will of a stone. It is, as I say, a thing of good. If it be raised to do evil, it will strike down whomever would so use it, be he man or be he god. Thus we must make haste. Go thou, my disciples, unto my brothers, and tell them that I bid them come to me. I am the eldest, and they will come out of respect, if not love. And so we went down from our master's tower, and divided ourselves, and went out of the vale to seek out his brothers, the other gods. Because the twins Beltira and Belkira could not be separated without perishing, they remained behind with our master, but each of the rest of us went forth in search of one of the gods. Since haste was important, and I had perhaps the farthest to go in search for the god Belar, I traveled for a time in the form of an eagle. But my arms soon grew weary with flying, and heights have ever made me giddy. I also found my eyes frequently distracted by tiny movements on the ground, and I had fierce urges to swoop down and kill things. I came to earth, resumed my own form, and sat for a time to regain my breath and consider. I had not assumed other forms frequently. It was a simple trick without much advantage to it. I now discovered a major drawback involved in it. The longer I remained in the assumed form, the more the character of the form became interwoven with my own. The eagle, for all his splendor, is really a stupid bird, and I had no desire to be distracted from my mission by every mouse or rabbit on the ground beneath me. I considered the horse. A horse can run very fast, but he soon grows tired, and he is not very intelligent. An antelope can run for days without growing weary, but an antelope is a silly creature, and too many things upon the plain looked upon the antelope as food. I had not the time it would take to stop and persuade each of those things to seek food elsewhere. And then it occurred to me that all of the creatures of the plain and forest, the wolf was the most intelligent, the swiftest, and the most tireless. It was a decision well made. As soon as I became accustomed to going on all fours, I found the shape of the wolf most satisfactory, and the mind of the wolf most compatible with my own. I quickly discovered that it is a fine thing to have a tail. It provides an excellent means of maintaining one's balance, and one may curl it about himself at night to ward off the chill. I grew very proud of my tail on my journey in search of Belar and his people. I was stopped briefly by a young she-wolf who was feeling frolicsome. She had, as I recall, fine haunches and a comely muzzle. "Why so great a hurry, friend?" she said to me coyly in the way of wolves. Even in my haste, I was amazed to discover that I could understand her quite easily. I stopped. "What a splendid tail you have," she complimented me, quickly following her advantage. "And what excellent teeth." "Thank you," I replied modestly. "Your own tail is also quite fine, and your coat is truly magnificent." "Do you really think so?" she said, preening herself. Then she nipped playfully at my flank and dashed off a few yards, trying to get me to chase her. "I would gladly stay a while so that we might get to know each other better," I told her, "but I have a most important errand." "An errand?" she laughed. "Who ever heard of a wolf with any errand but his own desires?" "I'm not really a wolf," I told her. "Really?" she said. "How remarkable! You look like a wolf, and you talk like a wolf, and you certainly smell like a wolf, but you say you are not really a wolf. What are you, then?" "I'm a man," I said. She sat, a look of amazement on her face. She had to accept what I said as the truth, since wolves are incapable of lying. "You have a tail," she said. "I've never seen a man with a tail before. You have a fine coat. You have 4 feet. You have long pointed teeth, sharp ears, and a black nose. And yet you tell me that you are a man." "It's very complicated," I told her. "It must be," she said. "I think I will run with you for a while, since you must attend to this errand. Perhaps we can discuss it as we go along, and you can explain this complicated thing to me." "If you wish," I said, since I rather liked her and was glad by then for any company. "But I must warn you that I run very fast." "All wolves run very fast," she sniffed. And so, side by side, we ran off over the endless grassy plains in search of the god Belar. "Do you intend to run both day and night?" she asked me after we had gone several miles. "I will rest when it is needful," I told her. "I'm glad of that," she said. Then she laughed, nipped at my shoulder, and scampered off some distance. I began to consider the morality of my situation. Though my companion looked quite delightful to me in my present form, I was almost positive she would be less so once I resumed my proper shape. Further, while it is undoubtedly a fine thing to be a father, I was almost certain that a litter of puppies would prove an embarrassment when I returned to my master. Not only that, the puppies would not be entirely wolves, and I had no desire to father a race of monsters. But finally, since wolves mate for life, when I left her, as I would of necessity be compelled to do, my sweet companion would be abandoned, betrayed, left alone with the litter of fatherless puppies, subject to the scorn and ridicule of the other members of her pack. Propriety is a most important thing among wolves. Thus I resolved to resist her advances on our journey in search of Belar. I would not have devoted so much time here to this incident were it not to help explain how insidiously the personality of the shapes we assume begin to take us over, Let any who would practice this art be cautious. To remain in the shape too long is to invite the very real possibility that when the time comes to resume our proper form, we will not desire to do so. I must quite candidly admit that by the time my companion and I reached the land of the bear god, I had begun to give long thoughts to the pleasure of the den, and the hunt, and the sweet nuzzlings of puppies, and the true and steadfast companionship of a mate. At length, we found a band of hunters near the edge of the forest, where Belar, the bear god, dwelt with his people. To the amazement of my companion, I resumed my own shape and approached them. "I have a message for Belar, thy god," I told them. "How may we know this to be true?" they asked me. "Ye may know it to be true because I say it is true," I told them. "The message is important, and there is little time to delay." Then one of them saw my companion and cast his spear at her. I had no time to make what I did appear normal, nor to conceal it from them. I stopped the spear in mid-flight. They stood gaping at the spear stuck in the air, as if in a tree. Irritated, I flexed my mind and broke the spear in two. "Sorcery!" one of them gasped. "The wolf is with me," I told them sternly. "Do not attempt to injure her again." I beckoned to her, and she came to my side, baring her fangs at them. "And now convey me unto Belar," I ordered them. The god Belar appeared very young, scarcely more than a boy, though I knew he was much, much older than I. He was a fair-seeming, open-faced god, and the people who served him were a rowdy, undisciplined group, scarcely conscious of the dignity of their master. "Well met, Belgarath," he greeted me, though we had never met, and I had told my name to no one. "How does it go with my brother?" "Not well, my lord," I told him. "Thy brother, Torak, hath come unto my master and smote him, and hath borne away a particular jewel which he coveted." "What?" the young god roared, springing to his feet. "Torak hath the orb?" "I greatly fear it is so, my lord," I told him. "My master bids me entreat thee to come to him with all possible speed." "I will, Belgarath," Belar said. "I will make preparations at once. Hath Torak used the orb as yet?" "We think not, my lord," I said. "My master says we must make haste, before thy brother, Torak, hath learned the full power of the jewel he hath stolen." "Truly," the young god said. He glanced at the young she-wolf sitting at my feet. "Greetings, little sister," he said courteously. "Is it well with thee?" "Most remarkable," she said politely. "It appears that I have fallen in with creatures of great importance." "Thy friend and I must make haste," he told her. "Otherwise I should make suitable arrangements for thy comfort. May I offer thee to eat?" She glanced at the ox turning on the spit in his great hall. "That smells interesting," she said. "Of course," he said, taking up a knife and carving off a generous portion for her. "My thanks," she said. "This one," she jerked her head at me, "was in so much a hurry to reach this place that we scarce had time for a rabbit or two along the way." Daintily she gulped the meat down in 2 great bites. "Quite good," she said, though one wonders why it was so necessary to burn it. "A custom, little sister," he laughed. "Oh, well," she said, "if it's a custom." Carefully she licked her whiskers clean. "I will return in a moment, Belgarath," Belar said, and moved away. "That one is nice," my companion told me pointedly. "He is a god," I told her. "That means nothing to me," she said. "Gods are the business of men. Wolves have little interest in such things." "Perhaps you would care to return to the place where we met?" I suggested. "I will go along with you for a while longer," she told me. "I was ever curious, and I see that you are familiar with most remarkable things." She yawned, stretched, and curled up at my feet. The return to the vale where my master waited took far less time than had my journey to the country of the bear god. Though time is a matter of indifference to them normally, where there is a need for haste, the gods can devour distance in ways that had not even occurred to me. We began walking with Balar, asking him questions about my master, and our lives in the Vale, and the young she-wolf padding along sedately between us. After several hours of this, my impatience finally made me bold. "My lord," I said, "forgive me, but at this rate it will take us almost a year to reach my master's tower." "Not nearly so long, Belgarath," he replied pleasantly. "I believe it lies just beyond that next hilltop." I stared at him, not believing that a god could be so simple. But when we crested the hill, there lay the vale spread before us with my master's tower standing in the center. "Most remarkable," the wolf murmured, dropping onto her haunches and staring down into the vale with her bright yellow eyes. I could only agree with her. The other gods were already with my master in the tower, and Balar hastened to join them. My brothers, the other disciples of Aldur, awaited me at the foot of the tower. When they saw my companion, they were startled. "Is it wise, Belgarath, to bring such a one here?" Belzadar asked me. "Wolves are not the most trustworthy creatures." My companion bared her fangs at him for that. "What is her name?" the gentle Beltira asked. "Wolves do not require names," I told him. "They know who they are without such appendages." Belzadar shook his head and moved away from the wolf. "Is she quite tame?" Belsambar asked me. "I wonder that you had time for such business on your journey, and I know you would not loiter." "She is not tame at all," I told him. "We met by chance, and she chose to accompany me." "Most remarkable," the wolf said to me. "Are they always so full of questions?" "It is the nature of man," I told her. "Curious creatures," she said, shaking her head. "What a wonder!" Belkira marveled. "You have learned to converse with the beasts. Pray, dear brother, instruct me in this art." "It is not an art," I said. "I took the form of a wolf on my journey. The speech of the wolf came with the form and remained. It is no great thing." And then we sat, awaiting the decision of our master and his brother gods regarding the wayward Torak. When they came down, their faces were solemn, and the other gods departed without speaking with us. "There will be war," our master told us. "My brothers have gone to gather their people. Mara and Isa will come upon Torak from the south. Nedra and Chaldan shall come upon him from the west. Balar and I will come upon him from the north. We will lay waste his people, the Angaraks, until he returns the orb. It must be so." "Then so be it," I said, speaking for us all. And so we prepared for war. We were but 7, and feared that our master might be held in low regard when our tiny number was revealed to the hosts of the other gods. But it was not so. We labored to create the great engines of war, and to cast illusions which confounded the minds of the Angarak peoples of the traitor Torak. And after a few battles did we and the hosts of the other people harry Torak and his people out onto that vast plain beyond Corin, which is no more. Footnote: the high places of Corin, which are no more, are visited at the end of the Malloreon. This is misdirection from Belgarath. End of footnote. And then it was that Torak, knowing that the host of his brother gods could destroy all of Angarak, raised up the jewel which my master had wrought, and with it he let in the sea. The sound was one such as I had never heard before. The earth shrieked and groaned as the power of the orb and the will of Torak cracked open the fair plain, and, with a roar like 10,000 thunders, the sea came in to seethe in a broad, foaming band between us and the Angaraks. How many perished in that sudden drowning, no one will ever know. The cracked land sank beneath our feet, and the mocking sea pursued us, swallowing the plain and the villages and the cities which lay upon it. Then it was that the village of my birth was lost forever, and that fair, sparkling river drowned beneath the endlessly rolling sea. A great cry went up from the hosts of the other gods, for indeed the lands of most of them were swallowed up by the sea which Torak had let in. How remarkable, the young wolf at my side observed. You say that overmuch, I told her, somewhat sharply. Do you not find it so? I do, I said, but one should not say it so often, lest one be thought simple. I will say as I wish to say, she told me. You need not listen if it does not please you, and if you think me simple, that is your concern. Who can argue with a wolf, and a she-wolf at that? And now we were confounded. The sea stood between us and the Angarax, and Torak stood upon one shore, and we upon the other. And what now, master? I asked Aldur. It is finished, he said. The war is done. Never, said the young god Balar. My people are Alorns. The ways of the sea are not strange to them. If it be not possible to come upon the traitor Torak by land, then my Alorns shall build a great fleet, and we shall come upon him by sea. The war is not done. He hath smote thee, my dear brother, and he hath stolen that which was thine. And now hath he drowned this fair land in the death-cold sea also. Our homes and our fields and forests are no more. This I say, and my words are true. Between Alorn and the Angarak shall there be endless war, until the traitor Torak be punished for his iniquities. Yea, even if it prevail so until the end of days. Torak is punished, my master said quietly. He hath raised the orb against the earth, and the orb hath requited him for that. The pain of that requiting shall endure in our brother Torak all the days of his life. Moreover, now is the orb awakened. It hath been used to commit a great evil, and it will not be used so again. Torak hath the orb, but small pleasure will he find in the having. He may not touch it, neither may he look upon it, lest it slay him. Nonetheless, said Balar, I will make war upon him until the orb be returned to thee. To this I pledge all of Aloria. As you would have it, my brother, said Aldur. Now, however, must we raise some barrier against this encroaching sea, lest it swallow up all the dry land that is left to us. Join, therefore, thy will with mine, and let us do that which must be done. Until that day, I had not fully realized to what degree the gods differed from men. As I watched, Aldur and Balar joined their hands and looked out over the broad plain and the approaching sea. Stay, Balar said to the sea. His voice was not loud, but the sea heard him and stopped. It built up, angry and tossing, behind the barrier of that single word. Rise up, Aldur said as softly to the earth. My mind reeled as I perceived the immensity of that command. The earth, so newly wounded by the evil which Torak had done, groaned and heaved and swelled. And, before my eyes, it rose up. Higher and higher it rose as the rocks beneath cracked and shattered. Out of the plain there shouldered up mountains which had not been there before, and they shuddered away the loose earth as a dog shakes off water, and stood as a stern and eternal barrier against the sea which Torak had let in. Sullenly the sea retreated. How remarkable, the wolf said. Truly. I could not but agree. And the other gods and their people came and beheld that which my master and his brother Belar had done, and they marveled at it. "Now is the time of sundering," my master said. "The land which was once so fair is no more. That which remains here is harsh and will not support us. Take thou therefore, my brothers, each his own people, and journey even unto the west. Beyond the western mountains lies a fair plain, not so broad, perhaps, nor so beautiful as that which Torak hath drowned this day, but it will sustain thee and thy people." "And what of thou, my brother?" asked Mara. "I shall return to my labors," said Aldur. "This day hath evil been unleashed in the world, and its power is great. Care for thy people, my brothers, and sustain them. The evil hath come into the world as a result of that which I have forged. Upon me, therefore, falls the task of preparation for the day when good and evil shall meet in that final battle, wherein shall be decided the fate of the world." "So be it, then," said Mara. "Hail and farewell, my brother." And he turned, and the other gods with him, and they went away towards the west. But the young god Belar lingered. "My oath and my pledge bind me still," he told my master. "I will take my Alorns to the north, and there we will seek a way by which we may come again upon the traitor Torak and his foul Angarak peoples. Thine orb shall be returned unto thee. I shall not rest until it be so." And then he turned and put his face to the north, and his tall warriors followed after him. That day marked a great change in our lives in the Vale. Until then our days had been spent in learning and in labors of our own choosing. Now, however, our master set tasks for us. Most of them were beyond our understanding, and no work is so tedious as to labor at something without knowing the reason for it. Our master shut himself away in his tower, and often years passed without our seeing him. It was a time of great trial to us, and our spirits often sank. One day, as I labored, the she-wolf, who always watched, moved slightly or made some sound, and I stopped and looked at her. I could not remember how long it had been since I had noticed her. "It must be tedious for you to simply sit and watch this way," I said. "It's not unpleasant," she said. "Now and then you do something curious or remarkable. There is entertainment enough for me here. I will go along with you yet for a while longer." I smiled, and then a strange thing occurred to me. "How long has it been since you and I first met?" I asked her. "What is time to a wolf?" she asked indifferently. I consulted several documents and made a few calculations. "As closely as I can determine, you have been with me somewhat in excess of 1,000 years, I told her. "And?" she said, in that infuriating manner of hers. "Don't you find that a trifle remarkable?" "Not particularly," she said placidly. "Do wolves normally live so long?" "Wolves live as long as they choose to live," she said, somewhat smugly, I thought. One day, soon after that, I found it necessary to change my form in order to complete a task my master had set me to. "So that's how you do it," the wolf marveled. "What a simple thing." And she promptly turned herself into a snowy owl. "Stop that," I told her. "Why?" she said, carefully preening her feathers with her beak. "It's not seemly." "What is seemly to a wolf? Or an owl, I should say." And with that, she spread her soft, silent wings and soared out the window. After that, I knew little peace. I never knew when I turned around what might be staring at me, wolf or owl, bear or butterfly. She seemed to take great delight in startling me. But as time wore on, more and more she retained the shape of the owl, "What is this thing about owls?" I growled one day. "I like owls," she explained, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "During my first winter, when I was a young and foolish thing, I was chasing a rabbit, floundering around in the snow like a puppy, and a great white owl swooped down and snatched my rabbit almost out of my jaws. She carried it to a nearby tree and ate it, dropping the scraps to me. I thought at the time that it would be a fine thing to be an owl." "Foolishness," I snorted. "Perhaps," she replied blandly, preening her tail feathers, "but it amuses me. It may be that one day a different shape will amuse me even more." I grunted and returned to my work. Sometime later, days or years, or perhaps even longer, she came swooping through the window, as was her custom, perched sedately on a chair, and resumed her proper wolf shape. "I think I will go away for a while," she announced. "Oh?" I said cautiously. She stared at me, her golden eyes unblinking. "I think I would like to look at the world again," she said. "I see," I said. "The world has changed much, I think." "It's possible. I might come back some day." "As you wish," I said. "Goodbye, then," she said, blurred into the form of an owl again, and, with a single thrust of her great wings, she was gone. Strangely, I missed her. I found myself turning often to show her something. She had been a part of my life for so long that it somehow seemed that she would always be there. I was always a bit saddened not to see her in her usual place. And then there came a time when, on an errand for my master, I went some leagues to the north. On my way back, I came across a small, neatly thatched cottage in a grove of giant trees near a small river. I had passed that way frequently, and the house had never been there before. Moreover, to my own certain knowledge, there was not another human habitation within 500 leagues. In the house there lived a woman. She seemed young, and yet perhaps not young. Her hair was quite tawny, and her eyes were a curious golden color. She stood in the doorway as I approached, almost as if she had been expecting me. She greeted me in a seemly manner, and invited me to come in and sup with her. I accepted gratefully, for no sooner did she mention food than I found myself ravenously hungry. The inside of her cottage was neat and cheery. A fire burned merrily upon her hearth, and a large kettle bubbled and hiccuped over it. From that kettle came wondrous smells. The woman seated me at the table, fetched me a stout earthenware plate, and then set before me a meal such as I had not seen in hundreds of years. It consisted, as I recall, of every kind of food which I liked most. When I had eaten, more than I should have probably, since as all who know me can attest, good food was ever a weakness of mine, we talked, the woman and I found her to have most uncommon good sense. Though my errand was urgent, I found myself lingering, thinking of excuses not to go. Indeed, I felt quite as giddy as some adolescent in her presence. Her name, she told me, was Peledra. "And by what name are you known?" she asked. "I am called Belgarath," she told her, "and I am a disciple of the god Aldur." "How remarkable," she said, and then she laughed. There was something hauntingly familiar in that laugh. I never learned the truth about Peledra, though of course I had suspicions. When the urgency of my errand compelled me to leave that fair grove and the small, neat cottage, Peledra said a most peculiar thing. "I will go along with you," she told me. I was ever curious. And she closed the door of her house and returned with me to the vale. Strangely, my master awaited us, and he greeted Peledra courteously. I could never be sure, but it seemed that some secret glance passed between them, as if they knew each other and shared some knowledge that I was unaware of. I had, As I say, some suspicions. But as time went on, they became less and less important. After a while, I didn't even think about them anymore. That following spring, Poledra and I married. My master himself, burdened though he was with care and the great task of preparing for the day of the final struggle between good and evil, blessed our union. There was joy in our marriage, and I never thought about those things which I had prudently decided not to think about. But that, of course, is another story. Footnote. That is not another story. It's the core of this one. End of footnote.